How to recognize the two underlying core wounds that trigger a fearful avoidant and can cause them to start showing up badly in a relationship. Leslie Wells, connection coach here. I help individuals improve, heal, thrive in their romantic relationships by looking at things through an attachment lens, understanding their own attachment style and how it comes into play in the relationship as well as their partner, so they can break out of those negative cycles that they get stuck in, mostly coming from their attachment wounds. If you're unfamiliar or you're new to attachment styles, the fearful avoidant is an individual who grew up with parents who weren't able to show up well for them. And so they may have had, they usually come from a background of trauma, whether it's big trauma or little t trauma. But typically the parents or their caregivers were not able to show up well for them as far as either their physical needs or emotional needs. There may have been parents that were divorced and there was a lot of fighting. There could have been substance abuse issues, mental health issues. There's all these different things that come into play. But they learned very early on that adults could not meet their needs. They could not show up in a way that made them feel safe. And they recognized as a child that the job of the adult is to nurture them, care for them, and make them feel safe, and to provide a not so chaotic, safe environment, and that their parents were unable to meet their needs in those or other ways. And so there's this feeling of betrayal. Like, I deserved parents that showed up in this way and you didn't, so you've betrayed me because you didn't do what you were supposed to do, what I have learned that a parent is supposed to do for a child. So they carry this betrayal wound forward into their romantic relationships, and they have learned from their experiences. So they're always waiting for the other shoe to drop, people to let them down, people to do something to hurt them. They have learned that love is not safe, that people cannot be trusted, and relationships are not really always safe. And right behind that, in the driver's seat subconsciously, is the wound of betrayal, and right behind it is the wound of abandonment, because ultimately they're afraid they're not only going to be betrayed, but that's going to mean the end of a relationship, and they're also going to be abandoned. So those two things kind of go hand in hand, but the betrayal wound is really the one that's sort of driving their behavior and the reasons that they do the things that they do. And so because of this betrayal wound, they are very hyper vigilant in relationships. They literally study all the behaviors, the mannerisms, everything about their partner. So in their mind, if they can see the bad thing coming before it actually comes, then they can sort of prepare for it. And then it's not like the surprise along with the pain of it. So they study everything about their partner. They can tell when there's a mood shift, when the manner, the tone has changed, whenever their schedule's off. And they take all of that and personalize it and internalize it as something's bad in the relationship, or it has to do with me. And so they're not always able to see, well, maybe something's just going on with that person and they've got their own struggles. They sort of always go to that place of, they're about to betray me, they're doing something wrong, they're doing something to hurt me, or this relationship is not solid, something's about to like come out around the corner and my world's going to be turned upside down. The problem is they don't always recognize what causes them to be triggered, that betrayal wound to be triggered, or that abandonment wound. And so it typically will cause the betrayal wound or the abandonment wound is disconnection. And that normally will trigger them, and they will show up in ways that are not so good. They will become even more hypervigilant. They will become very critical of their partner. They will become very nitpicky. They'll start really moving that goalpost and making them jump through hoops to prove that they're safe. And they do all of these things. They will even start fights and do the sarcasm, rude comments, the muttering things under their breath. They'll do all of these protest behaviors in attempt to connect. So if you are a fearful avoidant, you really need to recognize when you're going into that place and what's causing it. And it is almost always the feeling of disconnection. So it can come from the betrayal wound being triggered, can come from a partner's actions not aligning with their words. And we've got to give people a little bit of grace there, right? Like if somebody says they're going to be home within an hour and they hit really bad traffic, but they're on a phone call with their boss, so they can't call to let you know that, there's extenuating circumstances that come up. And if all of their other behavior points to the fact that they are a trustworthy partner, we can't take one thing and automatically assign malicious intent to it. And fearful avoidance will very much assign ill intent to everything that their partner does and look at them through a negative bias. It's a way to subconsciously keep themselves safe. So one thing that can trigger that betrayal wound is actions, words not aligning, inconsistent behavior that is not predictable, defensiveness, not being able to hold space for the fearful avoidance, actual feelings and emotions and desires. What goes less noticed for the FA is when there is a disconnection and they don't realize that they're feeling disconnected. So it doesn't always feel like, oh, I'm not getting enough time with my partner or my partner's not around so much. It usually does not feel that way for a lot of fearful avoidance. For a lot of fearful avoidance, they just notice all of a sudden that they are short, they're aggravated with their partner, that everything they say seems to be the wrong thing, everything they do seems to be the wrong thing, that even when they're making an effort, like it just doesn't feel good to the fearful avoidant, they can sort of get stuck in this place of feeling this impending doom and this just sort of low-level depression where they almost feel like they're stuck in a functional freeze. They'll find themselves like really scrolling a lot or staying distracted or sort of going into their shutdown. And it is because they are feeling that disconnect and they haven't quite yet realized it. For a lot of women, this looks like really starting to complain about things around the house or things not being done. Instead of having a conversation or approaching things directly, it's just like every little thing their partner is doing or not doing seems to rub them the wrong way. And it's just this state of having a short fuse, agitation, sometimes overwhelm. But it really is a signal a lot of times for the fearful avoidant that they are just feeling a lack of connection with their partner. And whenever they get reconnected, whether they go on a date night, whether they have a long, deep conversation, because that feels good to an FA, whether they, have increased their intimacy, those things can automatically sort of snap them out of those negative feelings, that sense of dread, doom, gloom, sort of low-key depression and irritability, because it fixes that need for connection that they didn't realize that they were missing, that was causing the underlying trigger. So if you're an FA in your relationship, you guys have been really busy with work, there's not quality time, maybe you're having just superficial, quick conversations as you're passing each other through the schedule of kids and work and all of the things. If you're starting to feel that way and you don't understand why and you're like in a funk and you just don't get it, a lot of times it's because you need to reconnect with your partner. You need to recognize it, because typically if you do not recognize it, you start showing up in ways that are ugly, unkind, short, ill-tempered, and that pushes your partner farther away. And then you go from that sort of starting stage of the irritability and just kind of feeling like this heaviness into this place of full-on despair and panic, because at that point your abandonment wound has been fully triggered because you've pushed your partner away and they're starting to shut down and withdraw. So hopefully this brings some awareness to some of you FAs who maybe are not aware of why you get into this sort of funk and this negative place where you're just sort of like have this dread and this anxiety and this angst and you're just sort of waiting for something to happen. You probably need to find a way to reconnect with your partner, and you need to do that through directly asking and communicating what your desires are and what it looks like to resolve them.